Welcome to another Tempo Storm Legends of Runeterra meta snapshot breakdown. Patch 1.2 has been live for a bit shy of a week now, and the meta continues to see daily developments. Top decks like Burn and Bannerman were hit pretty hard, while other cards have seen buffs. While these nerfs may have seemed tame on paper, they've really affected the archetypes and as a result, have left the meta wide open. Although it's pretty early following this balance patch, we wanted to give you a look into the top performing decks thus far, and explore the decks that our meta snapshot experts believe are at the forefront of the meta. Before we take a look into Tier 1, do us a favor by subscribing and turning notifications on for our YouTube channel over here at Tempo Strategy, as well as checking out the full report over at tempostorm.com. Now let's jump right into Tier 1. Leading off Tier 1 in this meta snapshot is Sedge MF. This might come as a surprise to a lot of players, but thanks to the nerfs to other powerful mid-range decks, coupled with how powerful Sejuani is, this archetype finds itself in such a commanding spot in the current meta. Sedge MF is a versatile and powerful deck to take to ladder. This archetype also stood to gain a lot from the nerf to Burn, turning that unfavored matchup into a relatively easy one. When it comes to favorable matchups, this deck has a plethora of decks it's happy to queue into, but the best one is against Vi Heimer. With so many different ways to kill Heimerdinger, this matchup can feel relatively easy. As for bad matchups, this archetype can tend to struggle with Fiora Shen. It can be hard to stop Fiora from getting kills thanks to all of the bubbles and attack buffs this deck has. Next up in Tier 1 is Sea Monsters. This archetype has made a deep impact on the meta and is sitting comfortably near the top of the tier list. Sea Monsters is one of the few decks left untouched by the previous balance changes. Thanks to the nerfs to Burn, there is no longer a need for cards such as Grasp of the Undying and Withering Whale, giving the Sea Monsters list more room for cards that allow it to go deep. Sea Monsters is a fun archetype and can feel very rewarding to play, cause let's be real, who doesn't like hitting their opponent with oversized Sea Monsters? When it comes to favorable matchups, Sea Monsters has a field day against decks like Fiora Shen. It can be near impossible for the Fiora to get online in this matchup as long as the Sea Monsters player consciously plays around her. As for bad matchups, Sea Monsters struggles immensely against Ez Karma due to the lack of champion removal that the deck has. On top of this, Ezreal Karma's combo is just faster, making it hard for Sea Monsters to find a reliable win condition. Next up is the previously mentioned and nerfed Ez Karma. This archetype recently saw a nerf to Karma, which definitely hurt the deck's power level, but the archetype continues to prove effective. As long as the deck can reliably get to turn 10, it's able to close the game out using its combination of champions. With Burn mostly out of the meta, Ez Karma has been able to perform well for the time being. On top of that, it also makes use of Will of Ionia, which is one of the most versatile tools in the game. Ez Karma has a good matchup against decks like Fiora Shen or Sea Monsters. Both of these archetypes struggle to mount enough pressure early on in the game, allowing for Ezreal and Karma to come online. As for bad matchups, Sedge MF tends to be difficult, as the deck can aggro you down before you can assemble your game plan, and if the game goes long, Riptide Rex can be used to close it out. Following Ez Karma is another Karma deck that was hit by the nerfs with Lux Karma. While the archetype suffered a hit from the nerfs, it still remains very popular to that of the pre-patch list. The only noticeable change is the removal of one health potion due to there being less burn decks in the meta. While Lux Karma finds itself in Tier 1, the archetype might find itself struggling to adapt to future metas due to it not having many options to flex into. When queuing Lux Karma, your best matchup comes from Endor. Unlike other Karma decks, this Lux Karma build can fight for board very defensively, making it difficult for aggressive decks to push damage. They who Endor will often not pose as a real threat thanks to having access to 3 copies of Will of Ionia. When looking at the deck's bad matchups, it tends to find itself struggling with Sea Monsters. Prior to the nerfs, Lux Karma found itself able to pressure the deep decks, making it difficult for them to get Nautilus online, but now that is harder, leaving Sea Monsters to develop their champion and close out the game. The last deck we'll be looking at today in Tier 1 is Vi Heim. While this deck did suffer heavily when Vi was nerfed, oddly enough, it benefited from the deep meditation nerf. While it might be weird to think a deck got better thanks to a nerf, this deck certainly did. When playing a cost-reduced deep meditation with Heimerdinger on board, you now get an elusive turret, which is a key component to this deck's game plan. This is a pretty skill-intensive deck, so give it a few reps before calling it quits. Vi Heimer has a solid matchup against Vlads Edge due to the deck's lack of ways to remove Heimerdinger. Aside from Culling Strike, it can be very difficult to remove the pesky Yordle, leaving the Vladimir deck to often get outvalued and outpressured. As for bad matchups, Sej MF can feel nearly unwinnable at times for the Viheimer. Not only can the Sejuani deck pressure the Viheimer relatively aggressively with its scout minions and sizable champions, but its ability to give Heimerdinger vulnerable can give them a way to shut off one of their opponent's key win conditions. While Tier 1 is comprised of the top decks that are shaping the meta, the second tier on our meta snapshot features decks that are powerful and often used as meta counters. While these decks are slightly weaker than their Tier 1 counterparts, they are still forces to be reckoned with. Let's take a look at some of the top decks of this tier. Leading off the second tier is Vlads Edge. This archetype gained a lot following the buff to Vlad, such as the additional survivability. Vlads Edge can find itself in a good position in almost any matchup, given that it draws a strong curve. The deck has a very straightforward but powerful game plan of overpowering the board and pressuring out their opponent. If needed, a leveled Sejuani can also give the deck strength later in the game, showcasing how powerful Sejuani currently is. Vlad Sej performs best against decks like Midrange Demacia, as they can easily win board thanks to the array of buffs the deck has access to, and their opponent also has a hard time preventing Vladimir from going off. On the other side of the coin, this deck tends to struggle with Viheimer due to the lack of removal, or Klepto, due to how many good minions the Klepto deck can steal from you, such as buffed Omen Hawk minions, or the Yeti from Averone Trapper. Next up in Tier 2 is the previously mentioned Midrange Demacia, also previously known as Grizzled or Bannerman. This archetype faced the nerf hammer like many others did, and took a pretty significant hit. With both Grizzled Ranger and Loyal Badger Bear seeing reductions in power, the archetype lost a decent amount of its mid-game potential. This isn't to say that the archetype is dead though, as there's still a reason it's finding itself in Tier 2. While the list may have changed from the previous one, the archetype still plays out like a mid-range deck by curving out and fighting for the board. Midrange Demacia has a good matchup against Viheimer thanks to durable threats and hyper-aggression. As for bad matchups, Midrange Demacia tends to struggle against either Vlad Sej or Fiora Shen, as the opposing deck's game plan lines up very well into that of the Demacian deck. The last deck we'll be taking a look at today in Tier 2 is Endor. This archetype is a bit niche and isn't very popular on the ladder, but the deck is very solid. The deck is pretty aggressive and aims to flood the board early, and then tries to close the game out with They Who Endure and Atrocity. This deck was slightly hit by the nerfs with Brood Awakening having its power turned down. This archetype can be very fun and refreshing to play, so we definitely suggest giving it a shot. Endor has a good matchup against some of the slower decks on ladder, such as Lux Karma, as you can easily outpressure them early and kill them on board. The deck can find itself struggling against the other popular Karma deck, Lux Karma, as they can fight for board defensively before closing the game out with its combo. It can be difficult to counter such a wide meta, especially when there are so many Tier 1 decks forcing the meta into different directions. We here at Tempo Storm have a controversial suggestion for you to take on the Runeterra ladder. Despite being one of the most despised decks lately, we suggest you try out Burn for the ladder. While we realize the deck was hit fairly hard with the nerfs, picking it up now will give you an edge on unsuspecting opponents. As Burn falls out of popularity, players begin to remove anti-aggro tech cards from their list, giving you a clear opening to take advantage of. Patch 1.2 has been impactful and has shifted the meta into a new direction. As time passes, new decks will begin to pop up, and as lists are refined, the meta will change accordingly. Thank you for watching our Legends of Runeterra meta snapshot breakdown. As the meta changes, we plan on having another meta snapshot, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and to turn notifications on to be kept in the loop. You'll see weekly Legends of Runeterra content on this channel, so be sure to stick around. We'll see you next time.